Let me do the host here. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the second LDP session. So with us, we have Dr. Manu Agarwal, who's going to speak to us on strength-based leadership. So Manoj is a good friend of mine. Um, I have the privilege of having him in my lineage also. He's my L cubed, right? Great or grand little.
Great.
And we've been working together for our past couple of years, just trying to find ourselves and become better people in general, whether it's for our society, for our family, in our relationships, whatever it is. So I've asked Manoj if he could speak a little bit about the things that he's learned over the years in his career and in his life, and share those pearls of wisdom with us. So here is my good friend, Dr. Manoj Agarwal, Brother Corleone. Thanks, Manoj.
Thanks, Marty. Thank you for inviting me to speak this morning on building strengths and specifically strength-based leadership. It's a privilege to talk to you all this morning. In addition to what you see on the screen, the PowerPoint, there is a handout that was provided, more of a kind of an outline that I'll be referring to. And the PowerPoint that you're going to be seeing is kind of just more for some visuals that I provided. Okay. So let me full screen that. All right, so brief outline that I hope you have in front of you. We're going to talk about what is strength-based leadership, what or who is a strong man, what is a definition of a strong person. And then we'll go into identifying your strengths, talking a bit about weaknesses, how to apply this, this framework to yourself and apply it to others. So first question here is, what is strengths-based leadership? And it's a notion that you would focus on developing strengths as opposed to focusing on assessing and developing upon your weaknesses. So our society, and many societies, ask us to focus on our weaknesses, identify your weaknesses, and work on your weaknesses. But the notion of strength-based leadership is that you reject this notion that you need to be good at everything, that you need to be a jack of all trades, but instead you're a master of a few. So you identify this and you apply monomaniacal focus on these aspects to strengthen your life, both professionally and personally. Your potential for growth is amplified if you focus on your strengths as opposed to your weaknesses. In fact, the data demonstrates that if you are able to apply these in your workplace, you're 6 times more likely to be engaged and 3 times more likely to have an improved quality of life overall. So it's really kind of rejecting this maxim that you can be good. You know, you probably hear this from, potentially parents or teachers or society as a whole, is, you can be good at anything as long as you put your mind to it. Rather than saying that, it's more that you can be a lot more of who you already are if you know what that is. And if you really think about it, a good example is Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan was the Michael Jordan of basketball, but he could not be the Michael Jordan of golf, and he could not be the Michael Jordan of baseball. So you identify your talents and you build upon that. So if we think for a moment, ponder for a sec, think of somebody you think is a strong man or a person who you look up to. And if you really think about that, the word that comes to my mind is integrity. And we have this gap between our true self and our social self, and that gap there is the integrity gap. So you think about who this ideal person is, and you think about, or this ideal version of yourself, and then you think about where you are, and that gap in between is your integrity gap. Or another way to look at it is a person who has a lot of integrity is a person who is deeply rooted. So you consider, yourself as a strong tree that lets out branches and bears fruit for others to enjoy, either at work or in your relationships. But are you separated from your roots? And how do you kind of bring that back together? to become full again. And it's this kind of model of masculinity. I guess we're of different generations now, with me approaching 40, and with most of the listeners in college or around that time, maybe slightly having graduated. And our concepts of what was masculine has changed over time, and it was for the better, where my generation and generations before had one rigid view of what it meant to be a man. And now we can move on to many more definitions of what it is to be masculine. And it's not rigid. It's not this kind of toxic mentality of one way or not. And it's kind of thinking about being true to yourself, not this social self that's constructed. So moving on to identifying your own strengths. You can think you can't be a strong man until you actually know what your strengths are, right? You can't apply a strength-based leadership approach until you identify it. So what are the ways that you can actually do that? There's some tools that are available online. There are different potential exercises you can go through. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of things that I've come across. This is, of course, not completely conclusive. So one is this thing called Clifton. It's put together by Gallup. And what they do is they ask you a ton of questions, and there are questions about how you approach conflict, how you approach with dealing with your emotions potentially, how you attack problems. And what they then do is they give you your top 5 strengths. And if you pay a little extra, you can get a detailed report that gives you your ranking in every domain. And for example, here is mine, and I'm not shy to show it. And what they essentially do is they give you, once you have your top 5, and I'll show you this in a sec, they then give you certain ideas to develop these strengths. And in fact, they give you at least 10 different strategies to develop your strengths. So simple math, top 5 strengths, 10 strategies each. You then have 50 potential strategies to build on your specific strengths. So that's one way to apply it. And if you actually go ahead and apply these, you're creating what's uniquely you, a strong version of yourself, not somebody else or not what society tells you that you need to be. And what this essentially is showing is that I should preface and say that these are not necessarily all strengths per se, but more kind of your inherent talents. And going back to that maxim that I suggested in the beginning was misguided, that you can be anything you want to be. It's more, if you think about it as a really simple equation again, you put talent and you multiply that by your investment, and that will equal your strength. So you can invest a lot of time into doing what you or somebody else thinks you should do, but the talent that you inherently have, or things that you lean towards, will be the great amplifier of what you're able to actually achieve. So a good example is that I spent most of my youth trying to be an NBA star, and when I capped my growth at 5'11", I wasn't built to be a tiny point guard. So NBA wasn't for me, no matter how much time and energy I put into playing ball. Another method of identifying your strengths is looking into purpose. This is a course that, along with Prati and Manish, and other guy, and Joel Andrews, another Beta brother, we took together on identifying what is meaningful for us. This was, as you may expect, something that we did during the pandemic, when a lot of us were we're struggling and looking for what it is that that's really important to us, and trying to find kind of meaning in the struggle. And this was a really, really great exercise in identifying what it is that you really live your life for, and really kind of having clarity around that. So going through the course, I highly encourage you to do that. It's free online, really easy to do, very down to earth. But when you actually sit down and try to identify your purpose or your purposes, it can get pretty messy. So here's an example of my first iteration. I can't even read most of my handwriting here. It's a lot, and it kind of showed me that there's a lot that I was trying to achieve, and it's complicated to do all of it. And I remember showing this to the guys first, and they're like, what the hell is this? But it eventually translated into something a little more clear. And this is a screenshot of what I had developed now almost a year ago on part of what my purposes are. And by having clarity around this, then it helped me be more intentional with my actions, and more intentional with my relationships, and more intentional in how I do things. And ultimately, when you identify what's important to you and you invest time in that, then you're really building your strengths. Okay. So for example, over here, you see some consistency too, where you may not remember, but looking back at the Clifton strengths, my number one strength was to learn. I was a learner. And then I self-identified my purpose as a learner, that I really enjoy learning, and I enjoy higher up on this thing, you see, I enjoy teaching as well. And part of my role in academic medicine is being able to train the next generation of radiation oncologists and medical students. And I was able to identify that importance without going through this purpose exercise. Another potential here is something called Matrix Insights. This is a really cool platform, kind of similar to Clifton, but it's more kind of intended for you to manage within your workplace. And I did this as part of a leadership course early on at my time at Penn. And what they did essentially is they gave you similar questions that you rate your competencies, and you sort what you think is important. You do another survey. But what's really cool about this, it's called a 360 evaluation, which is kind of a buzzword sometimes in businesses. But you're actually, the difference here is that you're actually sorting 360 feedback from people of different levels. So people so for example, your leader, you send out this survey to people who are, you potentially your managers, or in academic medicine, your chairman, out to your peers, to associates, and then maybe even out to friends, completely anonymous. And people can be completely honest without worrying about hurting your feelings. And then it's kind of compiled into this really cool, complicated thing. But what you see here on the right side is kind of this cluster of what was identified as my particular strengths and areas for improvement. So strengths were here in green, and they're broken down into different clusters. So for example, apparently I don't have a lot of self-knowledge and self-management, things I need to improve on. Whereas over here, the orange, I think, is things for improvement. The blue is kind of intermediate, and green is a strength. So, apparently here leveraging skills are things that I'm good at, but there's definitely things I can improve with, like how to actually look into and manage relationships. We're all bros in this call. My wife will agree that I need to work on my empathy. And sometimes I can have, going over to cluster 2, I can have great grandiose ideas, but potentially they're looking at reality testing. Perhaps they don't necessarily apply. So I guess some of the thoughts I have can be a bit more idealized. But a good exercise into thinking about where you are, going back into, self-awareness. And then really simply here, if you don't want to, you don't have access to these tools, or, can't shell out the cash for it, simple paper and pencil concepts here is really thinking about your values. And there's 7 really good questions here. I took this from that course on purpose, on identifying your values, and taking these questions, sitting down on a quiet evening or a fresh morning, and actually really thinking about it and letting your mind flow organically will kind of show you what really matters to you. So, essentially these questions: what matters to you? Who relies on you? Like, who are you responsible for? Who inspires you particularly? What grander causes do you care about? Do you care more about potentially climate change? Do you care about, girls' education potentially? What is it that you are, gravitate towards? What are you grateful for? We can talk a lot about gratitude practices and how that's really important. But essentially identifying what's right in your life and what do you really appreciate. What motivates you? Number 6 is really what gets you out of bed. And number 7 is your legacy. How do you want to be remembered? And are you living that way? If you had this, if you were, there's this another exercise called tombstone statement, where if you were to write down, what would be written on your tombstone if you were to die today? And is that in line with how you want to be remembered? And if not, then that's your integrity gap. And how do you close that gap? And then, thinking about what questions you find that were easy to answer, what were harder to answer, what took longer, or what was really hard to talk about. And is there something behind that? And what were the themes? And then you take all this, once you're done with it, and convert it to a B goal. And what I mean by a B goal, instead of saying, you have all these thoughts here, but convert it to something that's actionable. So, for example, the B goal, if you, if number 2 is your parents rely on you, or your father potentially, then my B goal is to be an active, aware and involved father. And then how do you break that down further? So really good thought exercise there. And then 2 other ones that are listed in the handout here. When are you at your best? When are you doing things that you are proud of and that you are absolutely producing, world-class magic? And that could be what you really value and what guides you. Kind of using joy as your GPS potentially. And then you also could ask friends, when am I at my best? What is it? What have I done that you thought was amazing? And if you are not afraid of getting your feelings hurt and your friend is comfortable, when am I not at my best? Things that you can use to be more aware. All right, so that's all kind of methods on building your strengths. And then we can touch upon weaknesses. And this talk here, I preface it by saying that we're focusing on your strengths. So you might be wondering, why are we actually talking about weaknesses? And the main reason for talking about weaknesses is because they can be limiting and they can cause blind spots. So this is an example of blind spot that I was cautioned about from one of my Clifton strengths. And this was the strength of as an achiever. And the blind spot here is essentially, saying that if you're not a blind spot is just like when you're driving. If you're not aware of it, you can get into an accident, and you can get hurt. You can hurt somebody else. So, for example, over here, and this is completely true, and things that I've had to work through before. Like, I get very frustrated when people don't work as hard, and I have to be aware that people hold themselves to different expectations. And then for the second one here, my wife would agree also that I take on a lot before necessarily knowing everything that's involved, and I need to be very mindful about what I commit to. So the act of the action I've taken from here is to have my default answer to most requests to be no, unless it's something where it's valuable to me or something that I can provide a lot of value to others. And if you think about it, if you are not aware of your blind spots, not aware of your weaknesses, this can cause false confidence, which inhibits you from thinking and essentially can cause you to become or appear arrogant or defensive. And that is, it looks like my slides are out of order, but that brings me to this effect called the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm not sure if people have heard of this. This is kind of not exactly what the people had put forward, but it's kind of how it's interpreted, which is as you start off knowing something, you build a lot of confidence, and you kind of reach this peak where you think you know a lot, but you really don't. So it's the peak of Mount Stupid. And then you kind of realize that, hopefully you realize that you're wrong, and you're like, oh crap, I really don't know much. And then as you continue to learn, you move upon the slope of enlightenment, and ultimately you plateau. I'm sure you know a lot of people who may be here at the peak of Mount Stupid. I'm sure there's a lot of examples, and you can think of things in your personal life. You can think of certain political things, not to take one side or the other, but you can think of how certain people may fit on this, fit on this figure, and potentially where you are. This applies to many different things. The other reason to be aware of your weaknesses is if there's something that is potentially triggering you. So what you see on the left side here is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And basically what they're saying here is that you need, in order to move up on your actual self-actualization or realization of your full potential, there's certain things that need to be met. So the real basic need is, of course, your housing, your food, just kind of real basic human needs, and needs for any being. And then, of course, safety. If you're not feeling safe, you're not going to be trying to work on improving yourself. And then moving on to more psychological needs, feeling belonging, feeling loved. If there's some trauma that you're holding on to from feeling different or not feeling loved, or potentially having some abuse, that can affect that. That can affect your esteem, feeling that you enjoy, that you kind of think you're a good person, you have self-esteem, that you love yourself. You can move further beyond that. And then, of course, self-actualization is achieving your full potential. But I think, I'm not sure if Maslow talked about this or not, but I think people move up and down this daily and periodically, where you may be at a point where you're, really achieving your potential, but then something happens, you have a breakup, or something happens in your marriage, or something hits your self-esteem. What if a really good example is, someone currently, maybe a few months ago in Ukraine, who's doing great, and all of a sudden they're moving way down on this pyramid where they don't have a home, or they're, actively being, they're actively threatened for their life. And then moves on to what I have here on the right, which is, core emotional needs. And when these core emotional needs are threatened, then there's fear. And when there's fear, then it inhibits any type of growth. It essentially activates your primitive brain. And there'll be times where you definitely look back at it and you're like, man, that was really dumb. Like, why did I do that? It's probably because you were activated somehow based on this emotional need and felt threatened. So, what are these things that are triggering you, and how is that affecting you? Is it creating a limiting belief or potentially a tinted lens in which you see the world? If it's something that you can potentially release, then that can potentially help you tremendously. A quote that I wrote down that I learned is, your past is a servant that has made you what you are, but not a companion to spend much time with or a friend to bring with you to the future. So it's something to inform you, but to move beyond if you can. And the other reason to potentially work on these is, are you projecting your trauma, your baggage on somebody else? Or it's important for you to do the work to heal your wounds so that you don't bleed on the person who didn't cut you. Who are you cutting right now unintentionally because you've got baggage? So going back to this modern definition of masculinity, there's nothing wrong with seeking therapy or talking to people about your trauma. And sometimes it just takes a couple of conversations to realize that you got things to work on. And once you untie that knot, it can be very freeing. Okay, so moving on then to application to yourself. So this is an active process. Once you do the work to realize what your strengths are, you hopefully do the work to see what your limiting beliefs are. Then how do you actually move up that Maslow's hierarchy to maximize your human potential? So many different ways of doing this. I'm gonna walk you through a couple of examples. This is, again, by no means exhaustive. So this here is an example from the Clifton Strengths again, that I think, I forget exactly where this one came from, potentially achiever or maybe focus task, but essentially give some suggestions here. I talked about 10 actions. There are 5 actions that I can do to potentially help me with one of my strengths. So these are things that I try to achieve. I try to set goals, and things I need to do better is celebrate the success before moving on. I think a lot of us will just move from one task to the other and may not necessarily think about your achievements, but that can help build confidence, and so on and so forth. So essentially, what you're doing here is you're creating authenticity. So it's a quote that I've taken from the Gita. It's better to live your own destiny imperfectly than to live in imitation of somebody else's life with perfection. So once you know better, you do better, and once you know yourself better, you can be more authentic in how you spend your time and what you apply your efforts towards, because you do have limited energy to apply each day towards various efforts, and how are you actually doing that? And once you have authenticity, then you can head yourself in the right direction. And if you so I'm an oncologist, and I do sometimes deal with people who are actively dying. And when you talk to people who are actively dying, whether you talk directly or you read about it or you learn about it, the regrets that people have on their deathbed are very similar. People on their deathbed never say, "I wish I worked harder." I wish I'm glad I didn't spend time with my family. It was more that I wish that I spent more time with my family, and I wish I didn't work as hard, and I wish I did that thing I really wanted to do. So, what are the things you really want to do? How are you going to live your life without regret? It's it's essentially, if you think about struggles you go through, you're climbing mountains each day, and how sad would it be for you to reach the peak of a certain mountain, only to realize you climbed the wrong one, and you don't have time or energy to go to the right one. So once you have that, once you really truly know yourself, then you can apply your potential in the right place. So this is a model, and don't mind my chicken scratch handwriting. I'm not too IT savvy, but this is called the 4 quadrants of potential. And we talked about talent. You can put talent and call that skill potentially, or skills you developed, or strengths, whatever. and then align that with your passions. And there's a really simple way to look at it. If you start on the bottom left, if there's something you aren't good at and something you're not passionate about, don't do it. If there's something that you can offload, you can outsource, or you can automate, then do it. So, there's certain things that you'll just have to do, maybe dishes or clean the toilets or whatever, but, try to minimize that as much as possible. And the polar opposite is something that you are skilled at and something you're passionate about. You ideally want to spend as much time as possible in this domain. And what work can you do to get there? On the top left, you got, skill but not passionate about. And unfortunately, a lot of people spend the majority of their professional careers in this box. So can you potentially derive passion from your work? Can you job craft, within your role and find something that you're passionate about? Or is it something you need to jump ship and change careers or change a job? And then the bottom right, you're not too skilled, but you're passionate about, this is a passion project. This could be, again, I talked about ball, and, I challenge you to game a ball whenever, but, I'm 5'11" and I play power forward. I'm not going to be that great. So I'm not really skilled at it, but I love playing it and I love watching it. So, spend time there because it makes you happy. You can apply to goal setting. So most of us have goals, have things that we have to do. We got a checklist, a to-do list, an agenda, whatever. But if you, and on top of that, we procrastinate, right? There's a lot that can be said about procrastination. We can have a whole hour discussion again on procrastination and how to avoid procrastination. But if you really think about what it is behind that goal, then you can actually, you can achieve them. It's kind of a reminder that achieving your goals with integrity requires you to live up to the values that guide them. So think about why you got to do the goal and then convert it to how you do the goal. So I don't know, an example could be as simple as, schedule oil change. And you might be putting that off. Why do you got to do it? Well, if you don't, your car is going to break down and you need to have a reliable ride. And if you don't have a reliable ride, you're stuck, or, your family's going to be pissed at you. How? Just schedule it, look at your calendar, whatever. Good example. You can apply this to any example, simple or complex. But the to be portion on the bottom right is going back to the be goal. Like, why? What kind of person do you need to be to get it done? And that reminds you of your values. Moving on, this can get extremely granular. It can be as granular as you want, but this is a framework that I try to apply. It's from Robin Sharma, called the Weekly Design System. And essentially, if you want to live your life with purpose and integrity, then kind of put your time where your mouth is. If you feel like you're actually you're living your life the way you want to go, or if you think, hey, I can't do it, I don't have enough time, I challenge you to open up your iPhone or your Android and take a look at your screen time. And how many hours are you spending doing all these different things that you think actually, are harmless, but are limiting you? And then, actually audit your time and apply your time to what you think is important. This is a really cool framework. You could probably find it online, find some information on YouTube, but incorporates kind of a macro approach, number one, where you connect to your values and your visions. Number two is you actually reflect on your week. And this could be weekly or this could be daily. Reflect on how you perform relative to your goals. And again, what are the gaps there? What is it that's holding you back and how do you improve? And number three, which I pointed out, that things I have to work on, and actually celebrate what you did right. And then actually look at number four, rating. how good was my life? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? And how can I do better? When you know better, you do better. And then set some goals. Number 5, what are the things that you need to achieve this week for you to be truly exceptional, to be an optimal man, an optimal version of yourself? And number 6, like, think about what it is when you're at your best. What are some things that you do that make you feel good, that make you optimal? So for example, I need to work out to feel good. So schedule those workouts, make them happen. Um, you know, use your time the way you want to build it. And then number 7, actually build these things into your life. You may have your school schedule or your work schedule, but build in your personal things. Actually schedule it. That what gets scheduled gets done. And then live it. Go ahead and execute based on how you planned it. Again, this is very granular. It's initially takes a lot of work and investment, but if you actually take the time and effort to apply, maybe not all of it, but a lot of this, it can have really good results. Going back to the reflection pocket, if you think about how you performed and if you were suboptimal, what was it? Again, don't mind my chicken scratch, but this is a concept from Jay Shetty that looks at what are your motivations behind your actions. There's 4 primary motivations, and are you acting out of fear when you acted defensive, or when you acted out of line, when you lost your cool, that got angry? What was it? What was triggered? And when you acted good, you actually performed well, what was that motivation behind it? And then apply more of that to your life. And ultimately what we're looking for here is when you apply these small changes, you may not notice the improvement, but there's this, these daily 1% wins, they essentially stack on themselves. And these another quote from Robin Sharma, these small daily, seemingly insignificant improvements, when done consistently over time, lead to stunning results. So over time, you'll find that the gap that you're trying to close is getting smaller and smaller. A couple other notes I have here. We talked about automaticity, making certain things automatic. How can you make excellence your default? And that's through habit installation. We all have habits. We all do things without thinking about it. And, challenge yourself to think, am I in control, or are my habits controlling me? And how many people wake up and open their phone first thing in the morning? How many people are on the john with their phone on? Is that something that you really want to be doing? Things to think about. You can automate a lot of these things to make it easy to happen, and make it your default. And lastly, kind of hold yourself accountable. Went back into the weekly rating system. And I really challenge you to think about what you do wrong, in addition to what you do right, because that's your strengths. But, if there's certain things that are wrong, is that something that you really need to work on? If not, if it doesn't impact you or really impact other people, fine. But if it does, then, or if it's pointed out to you, that's great. There's actually, if you really, really think about it, as much as we resist change, there's some joy in being wrong, because you're less wrong than you were before once you realize it, right? A bad day for the ego is a really good day for the soul. So just learn from yourself. Last concept here is application to other people. So you can, once you know your strengths and you have a fair sense of the strengths of others, you can interact with them and lead them from a place of strengths. You can assemble, if you have the opportunity to assemble a team, or you yourself can pick and choose your friendships. You can surround yourself with people and have them use their strengths to impact massive change. Or if you are aware of your weaknesses, you can build a team around you that fill in your gaps. So together, you guys are sort of whole. And if you have, again, showing you the extent of which you can go through this, if you have people who have done the same things you've done, you can have a platform that actually looks at how to interact with one another. So this is this example here is with one of the women that I work with doing one of my leadership courses. And you see on the left side, a lot of different ways that we can interact with each other. And it shows, for example, I put here how to show appreciation to one another is important. I could click on how to manage conflict between each other. You can have really, really strong relationships if you're really kind of aware of yourself and aware of the other person. And what you're essentially doing again is once you're leading people from a source of strength, we talked about in the intro that there's a 6x improvement in engagement and a 3x improvement in quality of life. But an engaged team is a productive team. So moving on to some closing thoughts here. Again, being open to knowing your strengths and being open to your limitations. You can move along this timeline on the left side of, I discovered something that needs to be improved. I thought about it, and now I'm learning from it. And then all of a sudden, over that whole gap of period of time, you realize that you have learned something new. If you're not aware of this, you're stuck in the beginning, but with time as a continuous variable. And moving on to the bottom right, if you're motivated to improve yourself, then we're all starting here on the right side where we're kind of who we are. But if you make the investment to improve, you'll find that you can separate yourself from the past. And of course, things are always changing around you. And if we kind of stick our head in the sand and don't move, the world's moving beyond you. So it's important that we adapt with the world. And ultimately, what this can lead to is, and the data shows us very clearly, that those of us who are aware of our strengths, who have a strong purpose in our life, are more resilient. So this top figure over here demonstrates that it's plotting cortisol levels, which is your stress hormone. And this is an experiment where people who are identified with high versus low purpose were introduced a stressor, and their salivary cortisol levels were measured. And you find that, of course, people are going to get stressed. That's human nature. That's how we're built. But people who have a strong sense of themselves and what they value are able to recover from that much quicker than the people who are not aware. So this little figure here, again with my chicken scratch, is when a stressor hits a person with high purpose, this can then lead to post-traumatic growth rather than being something that holds you back. And if you are self-aware, you then can alter your priorities, you can go on a new path, but ultimately you're stronger, more confident, and ultimately more resilient. You're a man of integrity. Really quick story here. So back in the day, the Greek terracottas were all built, and inside each terracotta was this little tiny golden figure of a Greek god. And this is called a daemon. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And a daemon was essentially, can be roughly translated to true self. So it's important that you recognize that within yourself, despite the layers that are put on top of you externally, there's still this true self that's waiting to be expressed. So if you are in touch with your true self, you can then be in touch with your inherent nature and you're kind of self-transcending nature, and you can pursue things in your life of meaning. And there's very simple here, there's different ways to attain happiness in your life, and many people are on the search for happiness. This hedonic pleasures. Hedonic is essentially just kind of chasing fleeting things, buying things or self-gratification or what have you. And then this concept of eudaimonic, which is moving beyond the satisfaction of material self and achieving things that are of high meaning. Putting this all together, all change is hard at first, messy in the middle, and beautiful in the end. All this work is hard, but nothing works for those who don't do the work. We all, want our lives to be better, and we may say, I wish this, I wish that. In my opinion, wishing for something is essentially code for saying, I don't want to do the work. And if you put in the work, it's going to be hard and it's going to hurt. But the soreness that you get from growth, just like when you work out, you feel sore. The soreness is better than actually not trying at all. The pain of regret is worse than the soreness of growth. And again, I'll tell you that from dealing with people who are dying. We're all going to be there at some point, and it's a common theme. So I hope you enjoyed this talk, and I can open it up for any questions.
That was a awesome presentation, Manoj. Thank you for sharing that. I do have one question for you. So of all the points, the concepts that you brought out or we discussed here, what would you say is like the most, maybe the first thing, or like maybe the most important thing we should at least concentrate on or start on as we go on this journey? What would you recommend?
That's a really good question. I think having an open mind, realizing that you are a work in progress, and being open to improvement, and picking any specific method that works for you. It could be one of the ones I mentioned, or it could be something completely different. But just committing to being the best version of you, and then putting in the work to do it.
And how would we know that we're succeeding on the path?
Another good question. That would come down to reflection, sitting down with yourself, journaling. Again, you could ask somebody, how do you think things are going, potentially, if you're ready for that feedback. But I think really, inherently, I feel people, once they are mindful, you kind of know what you need to do, and you kind of know what you've done right and done wrong, and just be honest with yourself.
Thank you for that.
Beautiful.
Like I said, this was such a great and uplifting kind of presentation. I think, again, a lot of times we go through life with people telling us what to do, like we're given factors, or we're given the criteria of what's considered successful, right? Everyone kind of dictates it to us, whether it's society, whether it's our school, friends, family, whatever it is. But many times we lose ourselves in that, right? We're working on this mythical conception of, in order to be successful, I have to do X, Y, Z. But while we're moving ahead, maybe materialistically, in terms of our own self, we might be struggling. So to understand these things first and foremost, right? Understanding who we are and what we need to succeed in life to make ourselves happier. I think that's like an important concept that we should all look into or practice. So thank you for sharing these realizations of yours. And I hope that I can also incorporate that or build on what you've discussed today. So thank you again.
It's my absolute pleasure.
So this concludes the second LDP session. The third one will be Next will be May 15th, and it'll be presented by another one of my close friends, Dr. Manish Sharma. He will be speaking similar concepts, but I think more on how to maybe a lot of this applications of what was explained today. So thank you again, everyone. We'll see you next time.